Thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And for more information about this show and the rest of Chor Leoni's season, visit chorleoni.org and subscribe to our newsletter, The E-Roar.
This episode of Chor Leoni Inside is sponsored by a beloved member of Chor Leoni, Garth Edwards.
They say it's all right. They say it's all right. Say it's all right. Have a good time, 'cause it's all right. Whoa,
Hello and welcome to Chor Leoni Inside. My name is Eric Light. I'm the artistic director of Chor Leoni Men's Choir here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and so glad to have you watching this show with us. I've got a wonderful guest today. Composer Sarah Rimkus will be joining us, sharing her work. But before we get into that, I want to play for you a past performance from Chor Leoni Men's Choir. And this is us doing a beautiful little piece by our friend Michael McGlynn, the Irish composer. And this is a piece called One Last Song. It's has a bit of a folky quality to it. You could sort of imagine it being sung at a pub late at night as closing time was happening. But it is one we've also sung at our Remembrance Day concerts in the past, and heartfelt text as well. We'll sing that for you now. This is One Last Song by Michael McGlynn.
Sing me one last song that will carry me away to the warm summer memory of home, and that old melody softly echoes on the breeze to a pathway that I must walk alone. I have loved, I have lain on the dewy morning fields with a cloud of apple blossom in the air. So lay me down. I'm weary of the cries and distant drums. One last farewell. The time for endless sleep will come. Sing me one last song as the evening shadows fall from the gold chariot reaching from the west. Raise up one last glass as I hear the boatmen call, and an old song will carry me to rest. I have loved, I have lain
That was One Last Song by Irish composer Michael McGlynn. Oh, I love his music, and man, do I love that piece, and man, do I miss singing it live. It's one we've featured on a couple of our Remembrance Day programs, and hope to do more of his works in the coming years, so stay tuned for that. I am so happy to be joined right now by composer Sarah Rimkus. Hello, Sarah. Welcome to Chor Leoni Inside.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
It's been lovely chatting with you and getting to know you. I've been a big fan of your work, and again, I just keep using this pandemic to just meet people I think are really interesting. So thank you for agreeing to share your music with us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the Reader's Digest version on how you got to be a composer these days.
Sure. I grew up in the Seattle area, Bainbridge Island, Washington.
Bainbridge.
Yeah, not too far from Vancouver. Used to go there for Thanksgiving weekend from time to time. I ended up getting interested in composition after taking piano lessons for many, many years, as is, I think, a pretty common path for composers. I was very fortunate to attend the University of Southern California for my undergrad in composition. Learned a lot there. Also was involved in the wonderful choral community that they have there, and sang in choir for a number of semesters. Studied with Morton Lauritsen, all that wonderful stuff. So when I went to continue on into grad school, I knew that I wanted to focus on that in grad school as well. So I ended up attending the University of Aberdeen in Scotland for my master's and PhD, where I wrote a lot of choral music and sang a lot of choral music in their wonderful British choral tradition. So that's kind of how I ended up being predominantly a choral composer, currently living in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with my husband, Thomas Lavoie, who you might be familiar with as well.
And I got to ask, as somebody from that area, roughly, have you had a pasty? Yes.
Yes. I've had many pasties, like at a music festival.
And for those of you that don't know what we're
good.
talking about, look it up.
They're like Cornish pasties. They're like meat pies. Yeah.
They're meat. They're
good.
Delicious, and they will stick to your ribs.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, will they stick to your ribs. When you talk about becoming a composer, I just also need to ask: was there one moment or one musical experience that said that you had that revelation of, yes, I am going to become a professional composer? Because being in music, writing music, and then deciding this is my life's work, those are, I think, three different, very different progressions. When did you make that decision? Like, yeah, this is going to be my life's calling.
This is going to be my life.
This is it.
I'm not sure. In terms of deciding to be a professional composer, I'm not so sure about that, because I think that's more of a question of like, I'm just going to keep at this and keep doing it for as long as I can. As long
as they let me. Yeah.
As long as I continue to earn income and be able to work with people, I am absolutely going to continue doing this. In terms of when did I decide that I was going to be a composer, I remember in 10th grade English, we had the option to do some sort of creative project for our final project on our Lord of the Flies unit, and I ended up writing.
This is not where I saw this conversation
like a
going.
10-minute
okay, yeah.
like a 10-minute piano piece, inspired by the final chapters of Lord of the Flies, and I was like, you know what, that was really fun, and I think I did pretty all right. I'm gonna keep composing. And from then on, I was pretty dedicated to it. So I guess that's when I decided to be a composer.
They were a choir that they were like choir boys that land on the island, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so there's
a connection there.
There's a connection there. So I want to have folks hear your work, and you've got this beautiful piece, We Walked Through the Trees. Could you set this this piece up for us and tell us a little bit about its creation and how you came to compose it.
Sure. This is one of those instances in which really I just came across this poem and really loved it. Dylan Thomas's poetry. He has a lot of really beautiful poems with a lot of depth of meaning, and they tend to, oftentimes they set really nicely to music. They tend to work in choral settings fairly well. And
very lyrical, yeah.
Very lyrical, but not like not excessive, and there's still music to be added. So it works nicely. And this was part of a set with a couple of other settings of Dylan Thomas as well. Those three pieces were the first pieces that I wrote doing my master's degree over in Scotland. So I was really trying hard to find a choral style that was going to work for me, I guess you could say. It was the first sort of extended choral work that I'd written, and I wanted to keep the cool harmonies and dissonances and stuff that I use in my instrumental music, but in a way that was going to work for singers. So I ended up exploring that with Dylan Thomas's wonderful poetry.
That's a great place to start. This is a lovely work. This is We Walk Through the Trees, poetry by Dylan Thomas, music by Sarah Rimkus.
Thank you.
That was We Walk Through the Trees, music by Sarah Rimkus, who's joining us here. That's beautiful. And if that's one of your pieces that you're working out your compositional style for choirs, good job. Nice start. That's gorgeous. I want to ask. I've been diving into your work. I've known about it for a while, and I've been diving into it, especially in the last couple of weeks in preparation for our conversation. And there has been a lot of your pieces where I use the term use folk music and folk songs in your works, either setting them outright as new arrangements or incorporating them or juxtaposing them against other texts and other music. Why are you, clearly you're drawn to these. What's the appeal for you?
I mean, I think that a lot of folk music just has a lot of energy to it, I guess. I think that it can be easy to write, I don't know, it's really easy to write slow choral music, I guess you could say. And I just want to give my music a little bit more energy. Maybe that's a fairly simplistic way of looking at it, but that's one reason. I also think that there are a lot of folk traditions that I tend to think about harmony a lot when I write. And a lot of the ways that harmony gets used in various folk traditions is really appealing to me. I mean, you can certainly hear the influence of Scottish music in a lot of the music that I wrote while I was over there. I also think it's hard to live in a place and be really absorbed into the environment there and not let it influence you. I don't want to be like closed off from the musical world around me. So of course I'm going to take on some of that influence. And you can hear that a bit in that piece, I'm sure.
Yeah. As you're, let's say you're doing this, not necessarily maybe incorporating a folk tune into something larger, but you're doing maybe setting just the folk song in and of itself. I've always found that arrangements come in various points on the spectrum. Some can be incredibly straightforward and faithful to maybe what would have been done, or finding a simplicity in the styles. And on the other end, you can deconstruct and juxtapose things in using that folk song in ways that it almost becomes unrecognizable and becomes the foundation of another composition. I would say you lie somewhere in between there.
Yeah, probably.
What's your approach in how much you're maybe being reverential to the original tune and the tradition that it comes from versus your own composition?
Well, I would hope that if I'm gonna create a new arrangement, especially an arrangement of a tune that has been arranged before and has been around for a long time, like I want to bring something new to the table, because certainly there are a lot of the tunes that I've arranged, there are arrangements out there already, and I do want to bring my own sound to it, because otherwise what's the point? So I think that I often tend to kind of think of, if I'm arranging a folk tune, I think of it a little bit similarly to how I might approach setting a text. Like, what is the overall feeling or overall message of this tune, both its tune and its words, and how can I communicate that in a broader sense in the music? And I would definitely agree with, I tend to kind of take a middle road on the continuum that you described. I've arranged a lot of shape note music also, And certainly that's music that I want to bring something new to the table with it. I don't want to those tunes are already great. I don't want to just rehash it. I want to bring something new, but I want to also respect the overall feel of the original or the overall message.
Sure. We've got this great performance of Shall We Gather at the River, your setting of this. Tell us about this piece.
This piece I wrote, I suppose, about 4 years ago now. The recording that you'll be playing is at least the only recording that I know about is the University of Aberdeen Chamber Choir, which is the choir that I sang with for a number of years back in Scotland. And they gave a lot of really wonderful performances of various folk arrangements during the time I was there, and they had a lot of great soloists within the choir. It was just a really solid group. So I wanted, with this piece at least, I wanted to give them something that they would just enjoy singing, and that could show off a couple of the soloists. And I, of course, used my sort of I put my spin on it by creating some sort of flowing aleatoric textures to show the river, because of course.
Because why not?
Why not?
And it's always fun to write for your friends, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
There's something special when you know which voice is going to take certain lines. Yeah.
You also know what they're capable of. So I know they can sing. I know what they can do. So I'm going to write them something that is appropriate to their technique.
Fantastic. This is Sarah Rimkus's arrangement of Shall We Gather at the River. That was Shall We Gather at the River, a beautiful arrangement, very fresh arrangement by Sarah Rimkus, my guest for Chor Leoni Inside. That's gorgeous, lovely, and
Thank
great
you.
singing, great choir. That
Yeah,
must have
they're
been a fun
wonderful.
group to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's always fun to go back and see those choir, if you see old choir performances that you're in, and you think about all those dear people, and can take you right back.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. I want to play for folks this next piece of yours called "Uprooted," and this has, I think, a really interesting story of its genesis. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, when you dive into the world of creating a piece of music that's dealing with real people or history or current events or those sorts of things, or maybe even has like political leanings or overtones, or it comes at it from that way, but especially when you're dealing with the words and thoughts of living people, what's your approach, and what are there things that you think about on the do's and maybe do not lists of the process and how you come to it?
Certainly, especially for this piece, and I think generally as a rule of thumb, I mean, if I'm going to write about a significant world event or a traumatic world event, I guess you could say, if I'm going to write about something of that nature that I have not experienced, I mean, certainly I want to speak to somebody who knows more than I do. That would be my first course of action with something like that. And that's definitely what I did with Uprooted. I think there is that line that we want to be very conscious of, and we want to walk between calling attention to important issues, but not wanting to simply co-opt them for our own artistic purposes. I mean, we don't want to shine a spotlight on people's suffering for our own artistic satisfaction. Like that's right. That's not cool. That's not what we should be doing here. But we can, if we're conscious of our respect for the people that have experienced these things, and we keep in contact with people that we're able to actually have interactions with, if we be respectful, we can often find ways to call attention to these things in ways that are appropriate and that celebrate the strength and resilience, and all the that celebrate the people that actually have experience. So with Uprooted, I went straight to the source. Basically, I actually interviewed women who were from my hometown, who were incarcerated during World War II as Japanese Americans. And I felt that if I was going to write about something like that, that was by far the most appropriate way to do it, was to actually get that story straight from them, and hopefully do it in a way that they appreciate and that they felt was respectful to their story and their experiences.
What was talking specifically about this project? We'll use it kind of as how you created this work. What was the impetus of wanting to tell this story? This is not your story to tell necessarily, but you can be possibly a conduit for it. How did the germ of the idea come into being?
Well, it goes back to, it went back to the theme of the concert, actually. So this piece was written for the Esoterics, wonderful choir in Seattle. And the theme of the concert was the reimagined requiem. So secular requiem works that are designed to be comfort for the living, that sort of thing. And between that theme of consolation from loss, and also the local aspect of the choir being in Seattle.
Right.
This event is a big part of the history where I'm from, especially Bainbridge Island specifically, where there was a thriving Japanese community before World War II, and all those people were actually the first ones sent away to the camps. And so that is a big part of the history. And the women that I spoke to, especially Kei Sakai, was the older lady that I spoke to, who was actually 22 when she was incarcerated. And she spoke a lot, especially about that need to talk about it and that need to tell the story, and how you can derive comfort, and you can derive, I guess, you can move through it by talking about it. So that was the theme that I kind of arrived on for the piece that applied to the theme of the concert, and that's how I arrived there.
How was clearly you went through this process with people that were local to you, so there was maybe a geographical connection there, etc. How was that then received? I mean, you go through processes, talking to people, and then you kind of have to go away into your hole and put the dots on the page. What was that like for that premiere, and how they reacted to seeing their story presented in this choral way? I mean, nothing that I do in my life do I ever expect and is going to turn into a choral piece. You know, how was that for them?
They were at the premiere, and they were quite excited about it. Actually, this is a story that they've told many times, and they're not shy about it. I think that they talk a lot about that, about the importance of them continuing to talk about this in the interest that it doesn't happen again. So I think that they were quite pleased to see it being presented to the world in this sort of dramatized way, to that end, in that interest, so that it to make a statement about current events, not just past events. So they were actually quite pleased.
I've got one more question about this, because it's something that I've been really thinking about a lot lately. Now, clearly you went through a process on the creative end that was inclusive of telling and working with people to sort of translate this story into this choral medium. And then, of course, those folks are there at the premiere. But now this is a piece of music that I can go buy and perform with my choir. So let's say I have an SATB choir, and I'm going to perform Uprooted. What would your advice be to me as what sort of process I should go through as a conductor, what I should bring through for my singers, and what should I do for my audience to make sure that the connections that you have made are maintained into this new performance? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good question. I think that, I mean, for me, if I come at this from the perspective of, if I was a director and I came across this piece and wanted to program it, I think that I would just want to make sure that I was putting it on a concert with an appropriate kind of thematic gravity, I guess you could say. Like, I don't want to, it's kind of a serious, it's a serious topic, obviously.
You shouldn't do a medley of what a funny thing happened on the way to the forum and then uprooted.
So I think that just being conscious of the programming around it, I guess, is the first thing I would think of. There's also, there are a lot of great resources online. The Bainbridge Island Japanese American community, they have a local organization with a lot of information about this part of the history. of the area. And certainly, if you're going to dive into the piece and learn about it, it would be most appropriate to learn about the history, and even if you want to send them a message and let them know that you're doing it, I'm sure they'd actually appreciate hearing that, because they appreciate knowing that the story is being further disseminated. So.
For sure. And I might go just interject myself into this. We're living in a world right now that, like, you and I didn't know each other. I was able to email you, and here we are having this Zoom conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be done so much easier now. I mean, people of all, my 97-year-old grandmother can do Zoom. So we can have these connections, and we can make those connections and be inclusive of people that were telling our stories in ways that I think were maybe prohibitive before. And I do hope that we can, if there is some silver lining to this pandemic, that we kind of use this technology that we are all now using on daily and hourly basis is to be inclusive of the stories that we're telling, because I think it's frankly pretty easy, and it's always, in my experience, been extraordinarily rewarding. So I don't want to keep going on with this, but tell us just a little bit about Uprooted and where this text specifically is. Phil Jack, our director, has made a beautiful text video of this piece, which I think will be a very moving way to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I interviewed two women from my hometown of Bainbridge Island, Washington, Lily Kitamoto Kodama and Kei Sakai, about their experiences being incarcerated as Japanese American women during World War II. Lily was actually quite young. Kei was a bit older. She was 22, as I said. So it was really it was important to me to hear their story of how they experienced that, and they talk a lot about the importance of telling it and not wanting it to happen again. So I took their words from our interviews and sort of compiled that into a libretto, if you will, of text that's going to work for a choral setting. And I sort of broke it up by perspective, so that the soloist was sort of commenting on some of the feelings that you might experience if going through this, while the choir is giving a little bit more narrative account of what they went through on their journey to the camp in particular, which is what Kay spoke a lot about. And it was originally commissioned by the Esoterics in Seattle. The recording that you'll hear is by William Jewell College and Tony Maglione.
It's a very moving piece, and I wish it weren't quite so timely right now. This is Uprooted by Sarah Rimkus. That was a gorgeous work by Sarah Rimkus, uprooted words of people from Bainbridge Island in Washington who were in Japanese internment camps. And thank you for making that piece. And I'm glad we were able to share that. It's still an important message that we need to get across here. I want to turn to one last work of yours, and this is from our friends over at the Gesualdo Six, and I've had Owen on the show a couple weeks back. My Heart is Like a Singing Bird, and you decided to write a madrigal, but it's kind of not like any madrigal that I've ever encountered. Could you tell us about this piece a bit? Because I find it so emotionally complicated.
Yeah. Oh, well,
its Facebook status is it's complicated. I think.
Well, see, that's what I enjoyed about it. I like emotionally complicated. I think that emotional conflict is like a big part of kind of what inspires me, and sort of putting things together that maybe don't go together and see what happens. So I enjoy that as a starting point. But I initially set this text by Christina Rossetti for their competition in 2016. So they had a set body of text. I think there were maybe 4 that you could choose from to enter their competition. And I chose that one because it just seemed like it would set the best. And there was something, it's been set by many composers. There were some kind of funny things about it to me. I kind of felt like she's talking about her love that has come to her and all the wonderful, exciting feelings that she's having about this love of hers. But she doesn't actually name this person or thing. She doesn't actually give any specific information about who this is. And there's something a little bit over the top about it. It's a little bit kind of like, okay, who are you trying to convince that this is so right? Like what's really going on here?
You think thou dost protest too much or
exactly,
something. Yeah.
Exactly. So I kind of decided to go that route with my setting and have it be a little bit like a madrigal, a love madrigal that's not quite so sure of itself. So I did that with the rhythms in a few different ways. I did that with the unsettled harmonies that I love so much, and that's the piece that resulted.
What's cool is that it definitely, if you look at it on the page, you can definitely go like, oh, it looks like a madrigal. Like there's definitely like madrigal stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
But when you hear it, typically madrigals can be like very one-sided emotionally, like I am so happy or I am so sad, and we usually don't have that mix at the same time. And I find this one of those pieces that I can just listen to over and over again, and depending on kind of what my mood is and what I bring to it, I sort of come away with a different emotional feeling on it and what's being said. And I just adore the ambiguity of the emotions here. It's just fantastic. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this show and sharing this fabulous music with us and all of your perspectives. It's just been wonderful.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation and lots of great questions. Great stuff to think about.
Thanks. Here are our friends at the Gesualdo Six. They made this video and recording during lockdown of this wonderful modern madrigal by Sarah Rimkus. My Heart is Like a Singing Bird.
My heart is like a singing bird. My heart is like a singing bird. Whose nest is in a water tree. Whose nest is in a water tree. My heart is like an apple tree. My heart is like an apple tree. Whose boughs are not with figs of fruit. My heart is it in doves and pomegranates and peacocks with 100 eyes. Work it in gold and silver, and silver thread, and silver thread, and silver thread. My heart is gladder than all these. My heart is gladder than all those mine. Because the birthday of my love, because the birthday of my life, because my love is come to me. My life has come. My heart is like a singing bird. My heart is like an apple tree.
That was My Heart is Like a Singing Bird by Sarah Rimkus, our friends at Gesualdo 6, singing that work in a lockdown performance. Beautiful video. I love those hearts in that. The artwork is just lovely. We will be back in 2 weeks with another guest. I thank Phil Jack, our director, and good friend here, for helping us put this shows together. And I want everybody to stay safe, keep the faith, and we will see you next time.
They say it's all right. They say it's all right. Say it's all right. Have a good time, 'cause it's all right. Whoa, it's all right. Now we gonna move it slow. Up in the lights low.